Hello, and welcome to Tech Latest by Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. From Nikkei Asia's Tokyo headquarters, I'm Alice French. In this episode, I'm catching up with our correspondent in Seoul, Steven Borowiec, about a deadly fire that broke out at a lithium-ion battery factory in South Korea last week. Hi, Steven. Thanks for coming on Tech Latest today.
Thank you for having me.
So many listeners will probably have seen news last week of a tragic incident that occurred at a battery plant in an industrial city just south of Seoul, where you're based. Now, before we get into this week's episode, do you mind filling us in on what happened there and how the accident occurred?
So this is from a factory that produces lithium batteries, and CCTV footage that's come out since the incident shows that on the second floor of this factory, there was a pile of finished batteries that looked like they were waiting to be packaged and then shipped out. And in this footage, these batteries they suddenly emit these plumes of smoke. And then within less than a minute, within something like 30 seconds, they burst into flames and they create this huge fire that's emitting tons and tons of smoke and really filling this whole room. And it seemed like a lot of the people who were on site at the time, they got fire extinguishers and they tried to put it out, but it spread throughout the building and it created a really huge conflagration. And tragically, 23 people perished in the blaze because they were not able to get out of the building in time. And so we have these kind of two variables here where I think on one side, this case shows just the speed of technology in Korea and just how the country is always coming up with these new things that are produced here, but the laws and regulations and the ways of ensuring safety in workplaces can't quite keep up. And at the same time, as I think we'll probably get into later in our chat, this is a country with a history of quite a few industrial disasters, and it just seems like with some kind of regularity every year, every couple of years, there's one of these big workplace disasters, and that leaves the public asking, why is it that this country has managed to develop so quickly and has gone from being quite poor in the wake of the Korean War to being, one of the richer countries in the region, one of the richer countries in the world, but still suffering these kinds of basic mishaps that tragically endanger the lives of workers.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like this disaster has ignited a debate around various issues in society. And it's notable that the majority of those who perished in the fire were actually foreign workers, which is something that you wrote a very illuminating story on last week. And this is not the first time that laborers from overseas have been victims of industrial fires in South Korea, right? Why do foreign nationals make up such a significant proportion of South Korea's tech manufacturing workforce? And is that a trend that we're likely to see continue?
South Korea has been accepting workers from other Asian countries, primarily Southeast Asia, as well as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, since the early 2000s, when certain low-wage sectors, particularly agriculture and manufacturing, were reporting these chronic labor shortages because they just couldn't find locals to fill these kinds of positions. And so the government created this program whereby workers would come in from other countries and they would work here for a maximum of 5 years, and they would earn the Korean minimum wage, and they would be dispatched around the country to these areas of need, usually small industrial cities and agricultural and fishing communities on the coasts. And that program, like this system of bringing foreign workers into the country, has been really drastically increased in just the past few years by the conservative administration of President Yoon Suk-yeol. If you look at the number of visas allotted to foreign workers, roughly doubled since before the pandemic. I think it was 120,000 last year, and then it was increased by about 30 or 40% this year. And so the government has made a lot of very kind of bold and decisive comments about saying how with South Korea's declining birth rate, the country's economic prospects for the future are very much in question. And these labor shortages are not going away anytime soon. In fact, it's only going to be harder to find people to work on farms and in small scale factories. Foreign workers are going to have to they're not just going to have to be more of them, but they're going to have to do a broader range of jobs. The government has talked about wanting to get foreigners to work in the hospitality sector, in hotels and restaurants. So this is very much an ongoing conversation, but the momentum and all signs that we have definitely indicate that foreign workers are going to become a bigger part of the South Korean economy. But incidents like what happened in this factory recently, they do illustrate the challenges of that and the risks.
Definitely. And I can imagine that last week's incident, I think that most of the fatalities there were actually Chinese nationals, right? That incident will have had quite an impact on the immigrant worker community throughout South Korea. You mentioned earlier that there have been some other industrial incidents in Korea as well in recent years. Do tragedies like this tell us anything about how foreign workers are treated there? You just mentioned there are already some groups that are speaking up for foreign workers' rights. Has there been any talk about how to prevent similar things from happening in the future?
There's a lot there. We got to be careful in terms of how we apportion blame, because not all the facts of this case are out. But I can just sort of point to the arguments made by some of the different stakeholders in the labor community in Korea. Unions will definitely have long been arguing, unions that represent South Korean workers and unions that represent foreign workers have long claimed that the unwritten practices in South Korean workplaces that employ foreign workers is to give them the kind of least desirable or most dangerous tasks, and that there's one reason that foreign workers tend to be kind of overrepresented in disaster cases like this is because they are at times assigned to do things that are more dangerous. And then of course you have the questions of perhaps there's a language barrier, perhaps these folks are not fluent in the local language and they're not able to completely understand directions about safety practices and evacuation and all the rest. In the aftermath of this most recent case, something that's been reported in the local press is that there is evidence to suggest that these workers were dispatched to this workplace through a kind of third-party employment agency. So, they were not directly employed by the battery factory that they were working at. They were registered with a firm whose job it is to connect workers with workplaces that need laborers. And there are questions as to whether when they were sent to this workplace, if they were perhaps maybe not brought fully up to speed on the potential risks of lithium batteries, if they were perhaps not fully briefed on how and where they could evacuate the premises in the event of a fire or any other kind of emergency. And so these are things that the government definitely needs to work out. I mean, I know that there are certain, for workers to get their visas to come here, there are certain requirements, like there is a language requirement. The workers do need to prove that they have at least some proficiency in the local language. And then there are practices that these dispatch firms are supposed to follow, but enforcement is definitely not perfect. And investigators from the state will definitely be looking into this. And, I wonder if once more of the facts of this come to light and once the circumstances that surrounded these tragic deaths becomes clearer, if perhaps we will see some changes to the legislative framework or some changes to the norms and practices that govern these kinds of small factories that increasingly rely on foreign workers.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting to see the long-term impact of this tragedy. But as you say, as well as highlighting the potential risks for foreign workers, last week's fire also ignited discussions around the safety of lithium-ion batteries themselves, which have, of course, become crucial for the tech industry worldwide. Do you think that this incident has at all shaken South Korea's faith in lithium-ion batteries? Could it have an impact on consumer sentiment, for example?
Well, news about lithium batteries being prone to fire and prone to explosion is not new. I mean, I remember some years ago there was I can't remember the exact one, but it was one of the Samsung mobile phones that required a lithium battery and was prone to sudden explosion or combustion, and it was subject to recall. And so that's not a new story. I've not come across any commentary that's suggestive of a national move away from these devices, either as something that the country manufactures or even something that's used on a daily basis. I think that this is probably being treated more as a kind of outlier case than something that's indicative of the lithium battery production process as a whole. But I do think at the same time, one reason that this particular case has captured the public imagination is that it's the apparent randomness of it. I mean, this was not a company that had any reputation or history of unsafe practices. If you look at this CCTV footage that's emerged from the incident, this is not a dilapidated or an apparently unsafe factory. It's bright, it's clean, it looks as though everything is functioning above board. There's nothing that meets the eye that would strike an observer as particularly risky or anything. But this led to the worst kind of industrial disaster. So I do think it's eye-opening in that sense, and I do think that it will create an impetus for some kind of smaller changes, some refinement of the existing regulatory framework. But I see no sign that it's spurring a move away from lithium batteries in any kind of large-scale sense.
Right, and I'm sure that both the company and the South Korean government will be hoping that these kind of incidents are few and far between moving forwards. Well, thank you so much for giving us that rundown, Steven, and I'm sure that you'll keep us up to date on any developments that follow. Hope that you'll come back on again soon to give us the latest.
Would love to. Thank you.
That's all for this episode. You can read more of Steven's reporting, along with a host of other stories about Asia's tech industry, on Nikkei Asia's website, asia.nikkei.com. And if you like what you hear, why not subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. There's a link to sign up in the show notes. And whilst we've still got you, if you're enjoying Tech Latest and would like to support us, please do give us a follow on whichever podcast platform you use. We also really appreciate any reviews you can leave, as these help new listeners to find our episodes. Thank you for listening, and check back in next time for more updates on the tech trends that matter.